In this episode, with our ATEM Mini or ATEM Mini Pro, we're going to look at some of the audio settings you can use for live streaming. Now, there are a few things we need to keep in mind here. Number one, the first question I get all the time is, what settings should I use? So I'm going to give you some settings here, but they're just a starting point. You're going to have to tweak them to your particular situation, your voice, your microphone, and your recording space. So keep that in mind. You can start with these, may need to tweak them. Number two, when you're listening to this, you need to use the best quality headphones you can get your hands on. If you're walking around out in some noisy place and listening on your phone, you're not going to get a lot out of this. And also you're going to need to ride the volume a little bit because I'm going to give you the raw audio that's coming out as we process it and get things set up. So there will be some volume fluctuations. Be prepared for that. We are over here in the ATEM software control. Down here at the bottom, I have my audio tab. I'll click on that. And the first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and just reset all of this so that we can start from scratch just like you would be. Reset and then reset. Now, the first thing you'll want to do is that when you come in here, your audio should be peaking somewhere around minus 12 dB. So first of all, however you send your audio in, you want it peaking somewhere around there. No hotter than minus 6 at the absolute most, but probably somewhere closer to minus 12 would be ideal. In the control panel here, you can see our audio is coming in from cam 1. We haven't applied any sort of offset in terms of the input gain here. So we've left that just as it is, and we're peaking here. Our absolute highest peak was at minus 9.8, but around minus 12 generally. All right, so first of all, to kind of tune the sound, we're going to use our equalizer. And this does a couple of things. First of all, I'll turn on band number 1. This is a high pass filter or a low cut filter. Same thing, different names. And what we're doing here is just applying this so that we get rid of any sort of low frequency rumble. So for example, if you have an air conditioner or heater running and you need to cut some of that low frequency sound, this will do that. I do this as a matter of course on all audio because you don't record spoken word generally below 80 hertz. And so I just set this at its default. It's at 46 hertz and I just turn it on and it has a little bend here which indicates low cut or high pass. All right, next up to kind of tune the sound to my particular voice and my particular microphone and the space I'm recording in, I do a little bit of EQ typically, but very, very mild. And let me show you what I mean here. I'm going to come over to band number 3, and I'm going to boost the gain on that. And you can see here I can move this back and forth. This is called sweeping, so I can sweep it back and forth. And what I'm going to do also is narrow that up a little bit. I just want to kind of be a little bit more surgical about it. Now, you can hear my voice has changed some. Notice here, as I get right up in this area, do you hear how it becomes really honky? That means there's potentially a little too much of this energy. So we're going to pull it back. And what I'm going to do here is just take the gain and we'll pull that down probably about 5 dB. And I can widen that. So that's what it sounds like now. So this is going to be very subtle. Here's before. And if I talk enough, there's sort of this harshness in the mid-range of my voice, around 1 kilohertz. And then let's go ahead and turn it back on. And now we've turned it back on. And you can see it just smooths my voice out just a little bit. So that's one thing you can do. Now, your voice will probably not be at 1 kilohertz. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. Hard to tell. What you need to do is just sweep that frequency back and forth until you start hearing something that doesn't sound good, and then pull it down and widen it up just a little bit. Now, use your ears. This is where you use your ears to make the judgment. If it sounds good, it is good. A lot of times people kind of second guess themselves. If you've been working on it for more than 15 minutes, you probably need to step away from it and come back. But that's an idea of how you can find frequencies in your voice. It can be a little bit harsh and pull them back just a little bit. So we're going to go ahead and leave the equalizer there. And now we'll move on to the dynamics. All right, the dynamics gives us a couple of different tools, an expander, a gate, a compressor, and a limiter. Now, I've come into the dynamics for channel number 1, which is where camera number 1 is coming in. Now you'll need to do this wherever your microphone is coming in or wherever your audio is coming in. So keep that in mind. And then also, we're going to put our limiter here on the master bus because we don't want the audio to clip at the end, but we'll do that later. So first, let's come into dynamics. We just click on this little square here for dynamics for camera 1. And that brings up this panel here. So over on the left-hand side, we have our input level, and that's how it's coming in from the camera, the audio. And then over here, we have our output. Now, what we're going to be aiming for is we probably want our output to be averaging somewhere between -10 and -5, but that can be a little bit dangerous if you do it over on this side because it could start to clip and things of that nature. So we'll do that when we come to the compressor and the makeup gain. For now, what we're going to do is let's come into the expander. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and apply a little bit of makeup gain here just so you can hear me reasonably well. All right, so let's turn the expander on. Now, what an expander does for us is, you can actually probably hear it already, an expander is going to reduce any noise that you might hear when I stop talking. So when I stop talking, watch what happens over here. We have this little gain reduction thing. This is the expander here. As soon as I stop, it actually pulls the noise floor down. Now, it's not doing it while I talk, or not much, but as soon as I stop talking, it engages. So let's go ahead and set this up here. Now you can set the threshold. This is the level when the audio falls down to this level, in this case, -45 dB. That's when the expander kicks in. And what the expander does is it expands the quiet things and makes them even quieter. So it takes the quiet things and it basically pulls down the fader and makes them even quieter. So that's going to be your noise floor, any noise you may have, again, once you stop talking. So our threshold is when that kicks in, the level at which it has to drop to before it starts to expand. And you can go down as low as -50. I usually stick it in the -45 to -50. And again, that's assuming that my levels here are peaking somewhere around -12. So let's just say -45, shall we? And call that good. Okay. Now the range is how much it will reduce that audio between phrases. Now I usually drop this to about -9. Its default is -18 or 18. You can think of it as reducing by -9 or -18 or whatever you set this to decibels. So the reason I set it to -9 is that it's less obvious that way. What you don't want to do whenever you're doing any sort of audio processing for dialogue or spoken word things, you don't want to go really heavy-handed because it will just sound obvious and strange. And so we don't want it to be super obvious and strange. We just don't want that noise in between phrases to be really distracting. So 9 is usually a good starting point. Do what you need to do to get yours sounding right. In ratio, I'm just going to leave that at 1 to 1.1. And then for here on the attack, I usually like to make that really quickly. This is how quickly it kicks in. Actually, we don't have to do super quickly. We can do a little bit of a delay. You can see here as I make it longer, it takes it longer before it kicks in. But I don't want it to take too long. So usually I'm going to leave that right around its default here. So I think somewhere in the, I think its default's about 1.5 milliseconds, and that's just fine. Now I'm not going to worry about the hold. The release I typically put around 100 milliseconds. There we go. And this is what that sounds like now. So you can hear what things sound like now. As I stop talking, you're going to notice that we don't hear a lot of the noise floor. So, all right, there's our expander. Again, you're going to have to fine-tune that to make it sound as natural and non-distracting as possible. So keep that in mind. And then next, we're going to come over to the compressor. Now, the purpose of the compressor is to, whoa, that's extreme, huh? I'm going to pull this up for now. Okay. The purpose of the compressor is to take those spikes in the waveform, the audio. Sometimes we get these very prickly kind of spikes sticking up, and that's when certain sounds are made. Usually it doesn't really contribute a lot, so it's going to be like at the start of a phrase, maybe. It's going to go really loud for just a second or really high amplitude for just a second, and then come back down. And we want to actually manage some of that and pull it back down so that we can loudness normalize. We can bring up the entire audio level, all of it together. If we don't do any sort of compression first, the problem is if we just loudness normalize, if we brought all of the audio up, those little spiky things, which are called transients, would then clip and they would distort. So what we're going to do is we're going to use this compressor to pull those transients down first, and then we can use this makeup gain to make our audio overall louder. So how do we do that? First of all, we have our threshold. Now, what you want to do with a threshold, this is the point at which the compressor starts kicking in. So once the audio gets up to minus 12 dB, it's going to start compressing it. And so you can see here, if we watch this meter right here, it'll come down from the top doing gain reduction. It's not engaging at all. Now, if I go down here, now it's engaging pretty much every time I say something. What I want to do is I want to adjust this until it's just barely tickling that meter. That is to say, it just shows up every once in a while, especially if I do a laugh test. So I'm going to do a laugh test here. Ha ha ha, ha 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 ha. So you can see there it brought it down a little bit, but it shouldn't be engaging all the time, just when I speak a little bit louder. So we found that in our case, about minus 18 is going to do that job. I leave the ratio at 2:1 because I don't want this to be super obvious. I want this to be pretty subtle. And what that refers to is that as soon as the audio does reach the threshold, it comes up to the threshold level I've set here, minus 18 dB. Any audio that goes above that or gets louder than that will be compressed at a 2:1 ratio. So if it goes over minus 18 dB by 2 decibels, this compressor will now compress it down to just 1 decibel. That's what a 2:1 ratio is. All right, and then our attack, we're going to make that really fast. So we're going to put that at 0.7. And I want this to react very quickly because, again, I'm just trying to use this basically like a limiter. I just want it to catch those transients and push them down just a little bit. So a fast attack will do that job for us. We're not going to apply any hold. And then for our release, we'll put that at about 100 milliseconds again. All right, so this is what we get now. Now notice here that our output is a little bit louder than our input because we've applied some makeup gain. What I can do now is that as I'm talking, I can increase this makeup gain a little bit here so that I'm coming in between minus 5 and minus 10 overall. And if I do a laugh test here, let's just see what happens. Ha 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 ha. Okay, we got a little bit above 5. We might pull down just a tiny bit. Somewhere in that range. So that's going to put us at a good, strong, healthy level for our streaming audience to listen to. And I think we're in good shape now. So let's go ahead and close that. Now, the last thing we want to do is make sure that if things really get out of control and something gets really, really loud unexpectedly, that we don't clip. So what I'm going to do is going to come over here to the master bus and click on dynamics there. And over here, we will apply the limiter. And I'm going to take the limiter and move its threshold up to about, let's go minus 3 dB, or somewhere around there. Now, the reason I go to minus 3 dB is a few things. That's when the limiter will engage. So when the audio gets up to minus 3 dB, it will start to engage and push that audio down. And I want to push it down really quickly. So I'm going to set the attack to 0.7, no hold, and again, the release to 100 milliseconds. Again, may need to tweak this for your settings. So let's go ahead and close that. Now I'm going to do a laugh test and see where we get to on the meter here. I want to make sure that I can't clip, so watch your volume on your headphones. It's going to get kind of loud here. Here we go. Ha 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 ha! Ha 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 ha! All right, you can see it stopped us at about minus 2.25 dB. So it's definitely doing its job, and that means we are not going to clip. Now, why did we leave that much headroom? We left minus 2 dB of headroom, a little bit more. Well, the reason we did that is that once you are live streaming, you're actually encoding the audio to a lossy format. And those lossy formats actually eat up some of that headroom. They'll use that up. So if you don't leave yourself 1.5 to 2 dB of headroom, you can still get clipping, even though you're not technically clipping here on your side before the encoding takes place. So that's why we do it that way. And that is an overview of the settings that I typically use when I'm using something like the ATEM Mini or the ATEM Mini Pro to do live streaming and kind of process my audio a little bit, make sure it's loud enough, make sure it's pretty clean in between phrases, and that it sounds just a little bit better with that EQ. So now let's go back to the ATEM Mini and the ATEM Mini Pro and the sync issues. I have a request for Blackmagic design. So when the ATEM Mini first came out, there was actually a 7-frame offset hard-coded into the unit. And that was too much. I guess you guys realized that, especially when you came out with the ATEM Mini Pro and the ability to control your Blackmagic Pocket cinema cameras from your ATEM Mini or your ATEM Mini Pro. And you changed the offset so that there was only a 1-frame offset from the time the audio came into one of the audio inputs until it was joined up with the video coming from the camera. Now that works great for the Pocket Cinema cameras. It doesn't work great for a lot of other cameras because a lot of them have more latency on their HDMI output. So what I would like to request from Blackmagic is a configurable setting for the audio offset. So if we could configure between 0 and 10 frames of offset for the audio coming into one of the inputs on the ATEM Mini Pro, that would be amazing. I know it's possible at least to do 7, because of course you're going to have to do some sort of buffering in there, but it's possible to do 7 frames. And if you could implement that as a configurable value, that would be a fantastic addition and make the ATEM Mini and the ATEM Mini Pro even more valuable. They're great devices, love them. That's one thing I'd love to see as well. So I don't necessarily have to feed audio directly to camera to keep everything in sync. So hope that was helpful. If you have any questions, go ahead and leave those down below. If you've not already subscribed, make sure you do that. And we'll be sure to get you more great videos on how to improve your lighting and sound for video. Talk to you soon.